Marcia Kavanaugh, thanks so much for joining us. Well, getting traffic tickets because of a police officer rather than a traffic camera isn't anyone's idea of nostalgia. But drivers in the city may be returning to those days now that some of the cameras are being phased out. The police chief says that they may have an extra benefit. We'll see what that is. Had there been a hidden camera when Entergy planned its strategy to win approval of a new plant, they might have needed a wide lens to cover the political activity. We'll look at those stories as well as a proposed wetland near Bucktown, pointing the blame on hurricane causes and dividing oil and gas revenue. Our Future Watch segment catches up with the latest on the new airport, and we will look at some political impacts from the recent elections that might have been but did not happen. On camera for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Kevin Litton, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Mark Schlefstein, environmental reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. We're going to go over to Kevin first. And so we're going to have less traffic cameras in the city of New Orleans, but now more cops on the street writing traffic tickets instead of the cameras.
I think this has turned into a really interesting political issue because obviously there's the campaign promise to start with that LaToya Cantrell wanted to take down all these traffic cameras. So they decided to take down 20. Not a huge number since we have over 100, but they are significantly going to reduce the amount of time that they're turned on in the school zones so that if you're speeding in a school zone outside of school zone hours, you're not going to get a ticket. But the problem with this now is that so you're going to have less tickets, you're going to have less enforcement, and one of the things that the administration now wants to do is they want to start doing more enforcement actually using police vehicles. And I think this really speaks to the manpower issue that the department has faced for a really long time. As they had more demands to get calls for service down, to get the homicide department, investigations team to the right size, they had to find somewhere to reduce. And that really fell on the traffic enforcement unit. So they got that size down so that it's so small that it's really only able to do investigations. So you're seeing a little bit of traffic enforcement here and there. That's really just what police are seeing as they're out there, but they're not really doing it as like a major enforcement mechanism. So what they want to do now is they're trying to say, okay, we're not going to have as many videos to review in order for an officer to write you a ticket, because an officer actually does have to write you that speed camera ticket, even though it's automatically generated. They have to review it. So they're going to say, well, that guy that writes those tickets is on overtime. We'll take him off overtime and then rededicate him to actual traffic enforcement. And then over time, since we have raises now, and since we're doing a little bit better on the recruiting, maybe we can build that traffic enforcement unit back up to the numbers that it was so that they could actually do more of this in-person enforcement rather than the automated.
But isn't he suggesting that this could also help fight crime?
Yeah, and that is something that I've seen in several police departments that I've covered. I covered one department where they required one traffic stop per officer every shift. You didn't have to write them a ticket, but they did that because they wanted to have visibility.
And I think, have interaction with the citizens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good or bad.
I mean, traffic stops are not necessarily there for a ticket. They are often used because somebody carelessly left a gun in the back seat, and oh yeah, they had drugs on them, and you can't have drugs and a gun on you. And that can help take guns off the street. You can sometimes find somebody who may have an open warrant who's in the vehicle. This vehicle may look suspicious to an officer, and it's certainly possible that car could have been on the way to a crime that they've stopped. And then I think really the big one here is visibility, right? When you see people pulled over on the streets and you're driving, you're going to say, boy, I saw somebody get pulled over here. I'm going to be more careful when I'm here next time. I think people who see this from their residence and see it in their neighborhoods, outside of their windows and stuff, they see, okay, that's a positive sign that police are present, and that sends a message to criminals. One thing that's interesting, I mean, DC police went as far as to constantly turn their flashers on. Every time they have the car operating, the flasher is sort of just like we're here. And you see it also with the mounted cameras that have the flashing lights on them. I mean, there is something to this idea of fighting crime through visibility.
And that's something that the chief pointed out too. Having the police out there making these traffic stops, traffic enforcement shows the community that the police are out there really, patrolling the streets, that they're out in the community. The tickets, though, they will now, for the most part, be based on the state law, not municipal, which means more money?
Absolutely. absolutely. And that's where we start getting into this interesting political story that I referenced in the beginning, which is that there's a lot of talk around trying to put less financial burden on residents in this city, in a city that has such a high poverty rate. There's a reason that we have a lot of uninsured drivers. There's a reason that people have a tough time, paying these traffic tickets. So if you're going to stop, if you're trying to, make these reforms around bail, or you're making reforms around traffic cameras, which they're doing now, then wouldn't you also want to, and this is the argument of Councilwoman Helena Marino, wouldn't you also want to try to do this on the state tickets versus the municipal tickets? It's 11 offenses. Some of them will be raised as high as $150. I believe no brake tag would go into, like the upper $300 to $400 range. I mean, these are really hefty tickets. And so the council is saying, we've got this one thing about the financial reforms and trying to make this city a little bit easier to live in. And then we've also got this issue of deployment. Are we trying to fill a campaign promise and then at the same time tell our police department how to deploy officers, i.e. through traffic enforcement? And that's something that I think that is probably going to get discussed as they get towards the end of the budget. I think the traffic cameras probably still stay down, but I think there's going to be this ongoing debate over, is your decision to take down traffic cameras informing the deployment strategy, which really should be left to the police chief.
And so when would this start, if it starts?
Well, I think they will probably start it in January when the new budget starts.
Okay.
One other quick one that I'll just mention is that this became an issue too. One thing that nobody really thought about, but the Orleans Parish Public Defenders, they're funded by traffic cameras. They're going to lose $300,000 if the city council doesn't find money to replace that. So it's really interesting to see how one decision on traffic cameras can affect a whole broad variety of different
It really does
things.
ripple around. Okay, thanks a lot, Kevin. Over to you, Mark. Oil and gas revenue, we're getting a larger share now, the state is.
Exactly. Fiscal year 2018 is the first year that the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act goes to its second phase. So you're getting a bigger chunk of money. It's not as much as the state had hoped. The state had hoped for as much as $140 million for it and 35 for the parishes. It's getting about half of that, both for the parishes and for them. But it's still a significant chunk of money compared to the $1.5 million to $2 million that were coming in earlier years for this. That money is useful for the state now because it's going to be used in the first couple of years to pay for some basically smaller levee projects, and might be used for a couple of coastal restoration things as well. But it's, we're still not talking big dollars. It's not like the BP money, but it's still pretty significant. The problem is that what happens in 2020, and that's when the bill comes due for the levee around New Orleans. The state's going to have to start paying back its 35% share of that cost, which is about $3 billion. And the Corps and Congress gave them 30 years to repay the money, but that's still $100 million a year. So the state at the moment is looking in the future, a couple of years, putting all of the GOMESA money into that if it's unable to figure out another way of either paying for it or convincing Congress to forgive the debt.
Oh, are we trying to do that?
There are big efforts underway, but this present Congress has not been interested in doing that at all.
Now, is this from the oil from like so-called international waters off of Louisiana?
Right. The GOMESA money is from deep water. So, and in fact, the money that the state is getting in 2018 is about $81 million from GOMESA, and the other $8 or $9 million is coming from both onshore, like if there's an oil well in a national park or preserve, and also in the near shore, the first 3 miles offshore. We get a share of that money. That money does not go directly into restoration or protection, though. Most of it doesn't. A lot of it is going into education.
So the total between the two is about $91 million.
Right.
Is that correct for this year? But you said it's not as much as what the state anticipated or hoped for. What
Right.
happened there?
Well, the state had hoped to get $140 million, which is the max that it would have gotten under GOMESA if all of the oil and gas had been produced to meet the maximum amount that all 4 states that are sharing this revenue would be able to get. And that hasn't happened for a couple of key reasons. The first is that the price of oil and gas has been fairly low for quite a while, and the other thing is that we're still seeing the effects of the BP oil spill. There was a moratorium for 6 months on drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, and that delayed the development of wells offshore during that period. And even though it was just a small amount of time, it's that new production that goes into the GOMESA that the state is getting.
So are we starting to see new production
But
starting?
there is new production that is both coming online, being produced, and there are more exploration that's going on out there now.
So quickly, the parishes are going to get how much out of this? Would you say?
They're getting about 18 million dollars of it, and it's from about $500,000 to 1.6 million for each of 20 coastal parishes. I think Plaquemines Parish, because it's the closest to the offshore, gets the biggest chunk, and they're able to use that money for both restoration and protection, but also are able to use it for some infrastructure projects like roads if they can show that it's related to servicing the offshore oil industry.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. Very interesting. I'm going to go over to Errol now and talking about elections and politics. These past elections had some kind of surprises.
What good is politics if not for idle speculation? And here's some speculation just from looking at some of the results. One of the elections in Orleans Parish that I think, to me at least, was kind of a surprise was for clerk of civil court. And this was Congressman Barrett, who was running, Brissett, I'm sorry.
Councilman Brissett.
Who was running against Chelsea Napoleon. This was, I think a lot of people thought that Brissett, being that he was a councilman, would win. Napoleon was like the deputy in that office and didn't really have much name profile other than the name Napoleon. But yet it was a fairly impressive win that Napoleon had. Brissett had just been elected to his council seat, re-elected to his council seat last year, like with 80% of the vote, and yet he didn't carry his district against someone who really just wasn't well known. And so that was a bit of a surprise. This was Dale Atkins' seat. Dale Atkins had been elected to a judgeship. So why did this happen? Well, some speculation could be that people just don't like someone being elected to an office one year then running for another office next year. And we'll see another example of that in another race. But the other thing, the other impact about this outcome is that there was speculation that there were people that if Brissett would have won, there were people lining up to run for his seat. The most prominent would have been J.P. Morrell, who's a state senator, very powerful state senator, very effective state senator, but term limited. And so this is an impact of term limits, in that people start looking for offices during their last term. But supposedly, what if Brissett would have won? What if Morrell would have won and been elected to that seat? Then his Senate seat would have been vacated, and then someone would have run for that, and a good possibility could have been someone who was a state representative who would have been elected whose seat would, and so you could have had this whole chain reaction, and so none of that is happening.
What is the other one that you
Well, in the
mentioned?
Secretary of State race, we saw that too. A real surprise, I think, to a lot of people was Julie Stokes, who's a state representative from Kenner, and Rick Edmonds, who's a state representative from the Baton Rouge area. Neither of them made the runoff. And it could be that same sort of thing, that someone who's just elected, we don't like seeing them running again so soon. And so the people who were elected, one was Kyle Ardoin, who got into the runoff, who was the interim, and someone else who I think had the advantage of that Democratic label. And so there's all kind of factors in politics, but we just think that there could just also be this factor of people wanting elected officials to stay in one place for a while.
Can I offer one insight on the Brissett Napoleon race? I think one factor there that people may not realize is that Chelsea Napoleon's people worked their butts off on that race. I went to 3 second lines before the election, and Chelsea's people were there at every single one, handing out nail files that said Chelsea Napoleon, handing things out. I mean, they really worked hard. And I think also there may be a factor here in that LaToya Cantrell has a very large base, and I think she probably primed that vote for women getting excited about elections. And the fact that you had a woman on the ballot in an election year when nationally women are not happy with what they're seeing, probably could have helped Chelsea as well.
I think so, and there were some forums that Brissett didn't show up for, and that could have helped also. And who knows? This is the only chance people ever have to vote for someone named Napoleon. You know, so.
Okay, thanks a lot, E. Don, we're going to get a new airport someday.
We are, you know, the delays and the delays. It looks like the delays are final, and that on May 15th, it will be open. It will, we've talked about this before. Crazy. The last flight will come in May 14th. They literally will pack up and move and start again, first flight of the morning, May 15th. It's kind of the only way to do it. You can't move half the operation. Security has to be set up in another place. Air traffic control has to, it all has to go together. Right now, inside the terminal itself, it is all glassed in. Things are coming along, I'm told, very well. They're laying down all the floors, tiling the bathrooms. The concessionaires are getting ready to do their individual build-outs within the concourse. The way this airport is most different, really, from our current airport is that almost everything is behind security, and it's only one security area. So you can go to different restaurants and shops, and you can go from gate A something to gate C something, and if you like the food better by the C gates, you can get there, and you don't go in and out of security to do it. The concessions we've talked about before are kind of everything from very, very local to very, very not local. For example, Community Coffee and PJ's Coffee, along with Starbucks, are all present in the airport. Flirty Girl and Dirty Coast have shirt shops. Shake Shack is there, but so is Midway Pizza and Ye Old College Inn. The old parking garage is going to be a new long-term garage. The old surface parking lots like Park and Fly, or I can't remember the name of the other one, along Airline Highway, those will still be used. The rental car facility isn't going anywhere. That will remain with shuttle service. The biggest issue is that the flyover ramps from the interstate are not going to be complete until 2023. When you come off the highway at Loyola Avenue, you'll have to go through 2.5 blocks of 3 different stoplights to get to the new airport access road and get to the facility. The Aviation Board believes it still is an easier way to get in and out than we currently have. We'll have to see. Loyola Avenue is being expanded. The City of Kenner and the Airport Board reached an agreement this week on moving the fire station that exists in the middle of the neutral ground on Loyola Avenue to give more space to everybody, which will open traffic. That will be done in May when the airport opens.
You know, the one thing about the concessions is that our airport is what's called, I think, an origin and destination airport, which means when you get here, you get out and you go where you're going, and when you come here, you go to your plane. It's not a place where people wait to transfer from one flight to the other, and that's where the concessionaires make their money. And there's not as much of that activity.
There is not as much of that activity, but we are a growing hub for Spirit, and Allegiant announced a new nonstop this week. There are airlines
Southwest,
Southwest is still the biggest airline servicing New Orleans Airport. So there could be in the future, especially now that the facility will be better, airlines that decide to make us a stop, not a termination.
I find one of the frustrating things about this is it really highlights the failure to invest in mass transit to access the airport. I mean, imagine if we had had rail that had gotten built out to the airport, then this whole problem happened. You can't get to the airport by car, but hey, you've got plan B, you can get there on the train.
Exactly.
I think elected officials are starting to recognize that. I think there's a letter that's been passed around to the parish governments to say, hey, we really need to look at more regionalized rail options.
Well, and we don't know what's happening yet with the old airport. They are going to be looking at what the highest and best use is for that 200 developable acres. Maybe there's place for rail destination in that 200 acres.
So more development perhaps down the way.
Yes.
But May for the opening.
May
of our new
15th.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, Don. Kevin, over to you. The Entergy story, natural gas plant, and paid actors there during a council hearing. Still a little bit more to it.
The story just doesn't seem to end. I mean,
No.
the whole thing broke in February, and it's just, you know, the type of scandal that you don't see very often. I mean, you see political scandals, you don't see utility scandals. And I think what was interesting about this story that I wrote this week was I really wanted to highlight an interview that Charles Rice, the former CEO of Entergy New Orleans, gave to investigators, which I thought was very interesting because he really got into his state of mind about what was going on when they decided that they needed this support, and they needed it so badly that they would hire a shady contractor who had a record of hiring actors in the past and go ahead and go full bore with this. And it kind of surprised me at how personal it was for Charles Rice. You assume that these things are about money, right? Look, you want to deliver value to the ratepayer. There's a Fortune 500 company, you want to deliver value to the shareholders. But he really saw this in a personal term, in the sense that the people that were so staunchly opposed to this were actually making it about him. And they were saying, look, see this guy Charles Rice? This was Charles Rice's description of it. See this guy Charles Rice? He doesn't want something good for our community. He doesn't care about our community. He's going to put something out here that's going to poison minority communities. And he reacted to that by saying, I have a good name. My father has a good name. I gave my son a good name. And how dare they attack somebody? I've lived in this community my whole life. I would never do anything to hurt this community. And when I took that to one of the opponents that it was most directed at, the Alliance for Affordable Energy, the executive director, Logan Burke, told me that she really saw that as informing why Entergy saw this as a war. Because if you take something that personal, then that's what's going to take you to create to create that war. And the other thing that she said that was very interesting is that she said, I never saw it as a war, because in wars, they're not about fairness, they're about winning. And Entergy had an obligation here to do what was fair to the community, and that's all we were asking for. So to have it turned into a war was really, she didn't say it was intimidating, but she did say that it was unsettling.
And that word war also unsettled council, right? At a recent meeting, they spoke about how they really did not like that characterization.
Yeah, Jason Williams said very strongly, you do not declare war on your own community. And look, this all goes back to this idea that I think that Entergy just had this really sinking feeling that why can't we get people to support this thing? We have contributed so much to charitable stuff in this community. We have tried to help this community so much, and none of y'all can come out and say you're in support of this thing. And I think that really probably hurt. And you know, it's not surprising to see it turn personal. The one thing interesting that I thought, just to close this thought, is the one group that they really didn't go after that much was VELA, which is the Vietnamese organization out in the East that does a lot of environmental stuff. And I talked to the executive director there, and he said, well, we're the ones that did have the support. We're the ones that could show up with busloads full of people, so they didn't come after us. It was easier to go after the advocacy groups that don't really do the community organizing that we could do. I thought it was an interesting explanation.
Interesting insight. Thanks a lot, Kevin. Back over to Mark right now, and we're talking first about, well, hurricane causes, if you can quickly touch on that, if you can, if you know the reason for them, and then I'll also need for you to touch quickly on the Bucktown Marsh Plan.
So there were two studies that came out this week in Nature magazine about hurricanes, and both of them seemed to have some bad news. And that was, number one, that hurricanes present and past, including Hurricane Katrina, actually are being increased in intensity, mostly rainfall, by global warming. And it's basically things that we've known from the most recent storms that have hit Louisiana and the other places on the Gulf Coast, which is that you've got a warmer atmosphere and a heck of a lot more water that's being held in it, and that increases the intensity of the storm and increases the amount of water that's dropped out of the clouds. So that's one piece. That was one of them. The other one was some researchers ran a model of Hurricane Harvey across Houston, and then ran it, like 50 miles away across empty land. Mm-hmm. And what they found was that, wow, Houston, the fact that it ran over the city, that actually increased, that helped explain why the rainfall was so bad. And it was actually the friction of the storm moving across the city actually increased the amount of rainfall that occurred. So those were two key things that came out that we're going to have to watch as we move forward with hurricanes and what the potential is for climate change to affect them.
So man-made environment can
man-made.
Okay.
We do change weather.
So yeah, okay. So we change weather, it can have these negative impacts in terms of the size of hurricanes, but also can have some positive impact too. And you're going to tell us about Bucktown.
We can. There's a fairly small grant, $400,000. National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is putting up $250 of it, and Plaquemines Parish is putting up the other $150, and it's being used to plan building wetlands along a mile-long piece of Lake Pontchartrain shoreline from Bucktown to Bonnabel boat launch. And the idea behind that is twofold. Number one, you get the wetlands out there, and some of the proposals that have been out there are like you build little tiny islands, a bunch of different islands over the mile, and wetlands surround them, and trees and other things. That actually helps reduce the potential for storm surge and waves coming in to affect the levee that's right on the edge, and which is very useful. But the other thing is that it's also going to add to efforts that are being made to improve fisheries in Lake Pontchartrain. That's something that's really, if you go back to 1989 when shell dredging ended, we've been trying to get the lake back to what it was prior to the 20th century.
So working to improve the water quality of the lake.
Absolutely.
And also to recreational, a chance for folks to take a walk in a boardwalk out there.
Indeed, there's going to be boardwalk and little, areas where you can go up in a tower and look at, the birds and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be useful.
So is this a project that is going to happen? You said study. I mean, is that for design?
It's pretty clear. The parish wants it, and I expect that the levee authority is also going to get involved because they've also been interested in figuring out additional ways of improving the ability of reducing storm surge along the levees.
We'll look forward to that. That will be fun to use. All right, guys, time to look ahead.
A while ago, we heard about a PJ's opening at the airport. Today, a PJ's opened at 840 St. Charles, which strangely is also in the offices of the Advocate. And that raises the question, people like Mark and Kevin, can they go there, being with the Picayune? And I've heard from unconfirmed that the answer is yes. And if they leave a news tip.
I got a personal invitation
if
from
they leave
John
a news
Georges.
tip, they get 50% off on the cappuccino.
Okay. Kevin.
Well, it's a short week next week, so I'll just say I'm really looking forward to my first Fairgrounds Thanksgiving. If you want to find me, just look for the really gigantic pilgrim hat. It's about the height of Abe Lincoln's top hat, and I'll decorate it up.
I think you're going to have a lot of fun.
Speaking of festivities, ready or not, here comes Christmas. Tuesday, 5 to 7 at the Astor Crown Plaza is the Canal Street tree lighting ceremony. Mary
that's here.
Cantrell is supposed to be there to flip the switch.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. Mark.
So I think we probably need to start looking down the river for another major investment that will be moving forward. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has put out a new environmental impact statement for a huge LNG facility for offshore. Major ships will be coming in and moving it offshore to Europe and maybe even around the world.
Sounds pretty important. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources.